The massive crystal dome of the Galactic Council chamber sparkled under the light of three suns. Inside, thousands of representatives from across the galaxy sat in rising tiers, their attention focused on the speaking platform, where a human diplomat named Jack stood. For the 100th time, Jack said, his voice steady but tired, "Earth requests the Council to address the illegal mining operations in the Orient sector. We have provided evidence of environmental damage to 17 inhabited worlds." The Council head, Ambassador Gray of the Stellar Consortium, waved a dismissive hand. His silver skin gleamed as he spoke. "The Council has reviewed your evidence and finds it insufficient. Perhaps humans lack the experience to properly document such claims." Jack gripped the podium tighter. Behind him, the other two human representatives, Tom and Lisa, exchanged knowing looks. They had expected this response. It was always the same. For 50 years, Earth had played by the Council's rules, followed their procedures, and submitted to their authority. And for 50 years, they had been patted on the head like children and ignored. Insufficient. Jack's voice carried through the chamber. "We submitted sensor data, biological surveys, and testimony from affected species. What more do you require?" Ambassador Gray's aide whispered something in his ear, making him smile. "The Council moves to dismiss this petition. All in favor." Thousands of lights turned green across the chamber. The Elder Races, the Stellar Consortium, the Mirror Collective, and the Deep Space Alliance voted as one. Their client species followed suit, not daring to oppose their patrons. Only the humans and a handful of younger species voted against the dismissal. "Motion carried," Ambassador Gray announced. "Next item on the agenda." "No." Jack's single word cut through the chamber like a blade. "There will be no next item." The chamber fell silent. Even the ever-chattering delegates of the Mirror Collective stopped their constant movement to stare. "Humanity has spent 50 years trying to work within this system," Jack continued. "We have been patient. We have been respectful. We have followed every rule, filled out every form, jumped through every hoop you put before us. And what has it gotten us? Nothing." Ambassador Gray's silver face darkened. "Representative, you are out of order." "No, Ambassador. This entire council is out of order." Jack unpinned his diplomatic credentials and placed them on the podium. "Humanity withdraws from the Galactic Council, effective immediately." Laughter erupted from several Elder Race delegations. They had seen dramatic gestures before. Young species often made them. They always came crawling back. Tom and Lisa stood, removing their credentials as well. Without another word, the three human representatives walked toward the chamber's exit. "You cannot survive alone," Ambassador Gray called after them. "The galaxy is too dangerous for isolated species. You need the Council's protection." Jack stopped at the doorway and turned. His smile made several delegates uncomfortable. "No, Ambassador, we don't." The humans left, leaving confusion and amusement in their wake. In the following days, as human diplomats across the galaxy quietly packed up their offices and departed for Earth, the amusement began to fade. Within a week, every human embassy was closed. Every human representative had returned to Sol system. The Elder Races sent messages demanding explanations. Earth's response was simple: message received and logged. In their private chambers, the Council leaders weren't laughing anymore. The head of the Deep Space Alliance, watching recorded footage of the humans' departure, noticed something that others had missed. When Jack had smiled at the end, there hadn't been a trace of anger or frustration in his expression. He had looked relieved, like someone who had finally set down a heavy burden they'd been carrying for far too long. The leader turned to his advisors and asked a question that would soon echo through the halls of power across the galaxy. What do they know that we don't? In the Sol system, Earth's factories were already running at full capacity. In hidden shipyards throughout human space, vessels of war and commerce were taking shape. And in a secure facility beneath the Pacific Ocean, humanity's leaders gathered to implement a plan 50 years in the making. The time for talk was over. Now, they would act. 3 months after humanity's departure from the Galactic Council, the first signs of change began to appear. Trading ships reported unusual activity in human space. The normally busy trade routes through the Sol system had become strangely quiet. At a monitoring station near the Pluto boundary, 2 alien observers watched their screens with growing concern. "Another convoy," said the first observer. "That's the 5th one today. All human ships, all heavily loaded, all heading back to Earth." His companion checked the readings. "What are they carrying?" "Unknown. Their new shielding blocks our scans." He paused. "Did you notice? They've upgraded every ship in their merchant fleet." Overnight, across the galaxy, similar reports flooded in. Human colonies that had once depended on galactic trade for basic supplies were suddenly self-sufficient. Massive construction projects appeared on dozens of worlds. Strange energy signatures suggested new factories operating deep underground. In the council chambers, Ambassador Gray received the latest intelligence report. "Impossible," he muttered, reading the numbers again. "Human industrial output has tripled in the last month alone." "That's not all," his aide added. "They've recalled 90% of their civilian ships. The ones still operating in council space are moving in patterns we don't understand. It's like they're preparing for something," Gray finished. On Earth's moon, inside a facility that didn't exist in any public record, General Mark stood before a holographic display of the galaxy. Hundreds of dots marked the position of human ships and installations. "Phase 2 is ahead of schedule," an officer reported. "The last deep space fabrication units came online yesterday. We're now operating at full capacity." Mark nodded. "And the new defense grid? Complete around Earth and all major colonies. We're expanding to secondary locations now." A scientist approached with a tablet. "The cloak is holding. Council sensors still can't penetrate our new shielding. They have no idea what we're building." For 50 years, humanity had appeared to focus on trade and diplomacy. In reality, they had been preparing. Every trade route had been carefully planned. Every diplomatic mission had gathered intelligence. Every seemingly simple merchant ship had carried hidden capabilities. Now those capabilities were being unveiled, but only to human eyes. In orbit around Jupiter, massive shipyards that had been disguised as mining operations revealed their true purpose. Warships emerged from hidden docks, their hulls covered in technology that made the Council's best weapons look primitive. On Mars, buried factories began producing advanced AI systems that the elder races had claimed were impossible to develop. Entire mountains opened up to reveal stockpiles of weapons and supplies. A Council spy drone managed to penetrate Earth's outer defenses. Its cameras captured images of sprawling construction sites before being detected. The images showed thousands of structures being built simultaneously by swarms of robots that moved with impossible precision. The drone was destroyed before it could transmit its findings. In his private chambers, Ambassador Gray reviewed reports from across human space. Trade with human worlds had dropped by 80%. Communication with human colonies was becoming increasingly restricted. And there were rumors, disturbing rumors, about smaller species signing secret treaties with Earth. "They're up to something," he told his advisors. "But what? Even with their increased production, they can't hope to challenge the Council militarily. They must know that." One advisor, older and wiser than the rest, looked troubled. "What if we've been wrong all this time? What if they weren't playing by our rules because they had to, but because they chose to?" Gray dismissed the notion. Humans were clever, yes, but they were still a young species. They couldn't possibly have been planning something like this. Could they? Deep in human space, another convoy of ships disappeared behind the new defensive screens. On Earth, more mountains opened to reveal their secrets. And in secure facilities across 1,000 worlds, humanity's true capabilities continued to grow. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. That was exactly how Earth wanted it. The message came at exactly the same moment on every communications channel across the galaxy. It interrupted broadcasts, overrode security protocols, and appeared on every screen and holographic display in council space. A simple Earth flag appeared, followed by 5 words. "We tried talking. Now we'll act." In the council chambers, chaos erupted. Delegates shouted over each other as the message played on repeat on their personal devices. Ambassador Gray stood at his podium, trying to restore order, when a second transmission began. A human in a plain black uniform appeared on the main screen. No name was given, no rank displayed. For 50 years, the figure said, humanity asked for cooperation. We requested fair treatment. We sought peaceful solutions. You mistook our patience for weakness, our diplomacy for desperation. Today, that changes. The screen split to show images that made several council members gasp. Massive fleets of advanced warships emerging from hidden bases, weapons platforms appearing out of nowhere as cloaking fields dropped, defensive systems that dwarfed anything the council races possessed. Everything you thought you knew about human technology was wrong, the figure continued. Every limit you thought we had was a lie. While you dismissed us in your chambers, we built. While you ignored our voices, we prepared. Ambassador Gray's silver skin had turned almost white. Impossible, he whispered. We monitored their development. We control their access to advanced technology. The human's voice carried a hint of amusement. Did you really think those monitoring stations showed you everything? That your spies found all our secrets? Every piece of technology you gave us, we had already developed. Every breakthrough you watched us make was decades old. The display showed more images. Massive industrial complexes hidden beneath Earth's oceans, antimatter production facilities in the cores of dead planets, whole solar systems enclosed in defensive shields that made them invisible to council sensors. We could have shown you this power years ago, the figure said. We could have demanded our place at your table. Instead, we gave you the chance to treat us as equals willingly. You failed. In the council chambers, the elder races were frantically consulting their military advisors. The Mirror Collective's representatives had stopped their perpetual motion entirely, frozen in shock. The Deep Space Alliance delegation was trying to contact their fleet commanders, only to find their quantum communications mysteriously blocked. As of this moment, the human continued. Earth is establishing new protocols for interstellar commerce and defense. Our space is closed to all unauthorized traffic. Our colonies are under our protection. Any aggressive action against human interests will be met with immediate response. Ambassador Gray found his voice. You can't do this. The Council will not stand for. The Council's permission is not required. The figure cut him off. This is not a negotiation. This is an announcement. The screen changed again, showing maps of new trade routes and defensive boundaries. They carved up large sections of the galaxy, including many regions the Council had claimed authority over for centuries. To those species who wish to trade and cooperate with humanity fairly, our doors are open. To those who have benefited from the Council's unfair policies, change is coming. The transmission ended with a final message scrolling across every screen. Humanity is done asking nicely. In the stunned silence that followed, a junior delegate from a small outer rim world started laughing. Others turned to stare at him in shock. Don't you see? He said, wiping tears from his eyes. They played us. For 50 years, they played us perfectly. We thought we were keeping them in their place, but they were just watching, learning all our weaknesses, building their strength. And we never saw it coming. Ambassador Gray sank into his chair as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Human ships were already moving to enforce their new boundaries. Colonial worlds were activating defensive systems that hadn't existed hours ago. And most worrying of all, several smaller species were openly declaring their support for Earth's actions. The age of human diplomacy was over. The galaxy was about to learn why that was terrifying news. 1 month after humanity's announcement, the galaxy was learning just how much power had shifted. At a border checkpoint near the Centauri sector, a Council trade fleet faced off against 3 human warships. "You cannot block this route," the council captain declared. "We have used this trade lane for 1,000 years." The response from the human ships was calm. "The route is now under Earth's protection. You may proceed only after inspection and payment of standard fees." "We refuse. We are a council fleet. We do not answer to." His words cut off as his ship's engines suddenly powered down. The human vessels hadn't fired a shot or launched any visible weapons. "Your engines will restart once inspection is complete," the human commander informed them. "Resistance is noted. Fees are now doubled." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Human ships enforced new trade rules with technologies that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. Council weapons had no effect on their shields. Their sensors could detect cloaked ships. Their engines could outrun anything. In a secret council meeting, military leaders gathered to discuss the crisis. "We've lost control of 30% of our trade routes," one general reported. "The humans aren't just enforcing their borders, they're protecting smaller species from our tax collectors." Ambassador Gray looked older than ever. "What about our attempt to pressure their colonies?" "Failed completely. We sent our best fleet to blockade their outer worlds." The general's hands shook slightly. "They never even got close. Some kind of barrier just pushed them back. No weapons fired. Like swatting insects." On a small farming world that had long suffered under council taxation, human ships arrived with an offer. Fair trade rates, protection from exploitation, a chance to grow without the elder races taking most of their profits. They accepted immediately. Within days, their world's productivity doubled. The Deep Space Alliance tried to make an example of them. They sent a battle fleet to restore order. The fleet never arrived. Their ships emerged from faster-than-light travel to find themselves back where they'd started, with no explanation of how they'd been redirected. In his command center on Mars, General Mark reviewed the latest reports. "Another dozen worlds have accepted our protection. The Council's economic grip is weakening." His aide nodded. "And the resource channels? Fully under our control. Turns out many species are happy to trade with us directly instead of going through council middlemen. Funny how that works." The screen showed hundreds of human ships escorting merchant vessels of various species. Each ship carried a fraction of the crew that council vessels required, operated by advanced AI systems that humanity had pretended not to possess. In the council chambers, the elder races faced an uncomfortable truth. Their power had always depended on controlling trade, resources, and technology. Now humanity was simply ignoring that control. "We could combine our fleets," a mirror collective leader suggested. "Overwhelm them with numbers." Ambassador Gray shook his head. "Haven't you been paying attention? They've demonstrated power we never dreamed they had, and I suspect we've only seen a fraction of their capabilities." A junior member spoke up. "Several of our client species are asking to renegotiate their treaties. They say if we don't agree to better terms, they'll accept human protection instead." The room fell silent. This was the real crisis. For millennia, the elder races had maintained power through a complex web of treaties, trade agreements, and technological controls. Humanity wasn't just challenging that system. They were offering an alternative. On Earth, the leaders of the new Human Trade Alliance raised glasses in a quiet celebration. "The Council still thinks this is about military power," one said, smiling. "They don't understand that we've already won. Not with weapons, but by simply offering something better." As if to emphasize his words, another report came in. 3 more worlds had just requested human protection. The power shift wasn't coming. It was already here. The announcement of the Terra Accord shook the foundations of galactic politics. In a massive space station orbiting Jupiter, representatives from 40 different species gathered to sign the new alliance agreement. Unlike the towering crystal spires of the council chambers, the human facility was practical and efficient. No grand displays of wealth, no elaborate ceremonies, just results. "The terms are simple," Jack stated, standing before the gathered delegates. "Equal representation, fair trade, Mutual defense. No species holds power over another. The Council's spies, watching from afar, noted how different this meeting was from their own. Species that the elder races had dismissed as primitive sat at the same table as advanced civilizations. There was no hierarchy, no special treatment. The Terra Accord recognizes that every species has value, Jack continued. Whether you mine asteroids or build starships, whether you're from a single world or a dozen, your voice matters here. In the council chambers, Ambassador Gray received the list of initial signatures. His hands trembled. "This is worse than we thought," he told his advisors. "Look at who's joining them. The crystal miners of Rigel, the cloud dwellers of Antares, the deep space nomads. But they're all minor species," one advisor said dismissively. "Minor?" Gray laughed bitterly. "The crystal miners control 40% of the galaxy's raw materials. The cloud dwellers have mapping data we've tried to buy for centuries. The nomads know trade routes we've never even found." Back at the signing ceremony, more revelations followed. Earth unveiled a new faster-than-light transportation network, offering member species free access. Trade barriers fell. Information flowed freely. "Let me be clear," Jack addressed the gathering. "We're not trying to replace the Council's control with our own. We're ending the concept of galactic control altogether." In their secret shipyards, the elder races were frantically building up their forces. Then came the second shock of the day. Human sensors detected and broadcast the location of every hidden military installation in Council space. Just so everyone's clear on the strategic situation, the human military commander announced on an open channel, "We can see everything you're doing. We've been able to see it for years." To demonstrate, they revealed scans showing the exact number and position of every Council warship, every secret base, every cloaked facility. The Council's military advantage had vanished overnight. In a private meeting room, the leaders of several minor species discussed their decision to join the Terra Accord. "The Council called us primitive because we live in asteroid belts," one crystal miner said. "Humans asked us to teach them our mining techniques." A cloud dweller added, "The Council demanded our navigation data. Humans offered to trade for it fairly." On Earth, the Terra Accord headquarters was already handling trade volumes that dwarfed the Council's. Ships moved freely through human space, their cargoes protected by the most advanced defense fleet ever seen. Ambassador Gray made one last attempt to maintain control. He called an emergency council session to declare the Terra Accord illegal. The chamber was half empty. "Where is everyone?" he demanded. "Many delegates are attending the Terra Accord signing ceremony," his aide admitted. In human space, more ships arrived every hour. Species that had been enemies under Council rule found common ground. Trade flourished without the Council's heavy taxes and restrictions. The humans had done more than build a military force. They had created an alternative, one that worked better than the system it was replacing. A young Council aide, watching the latest reports, turned to Ambassador Gray. "Should we be worried?" Gray stared at the screens showing the growing power of the Terra Accord. "Worried? We should be terrified. The humans didn't just build better weapons or faster ships. They've proved that everything we built our power on was a lie." As if to emphasize his point, another alert came in. 3 more Council member species had just announced their intention to join the Terra Accord. The new order wasn't coming through conquest or force. It was arriving through choice. And that, more than any weapon, was what spelled the end of the Council's reign. The Council's attack came at dawn, Earth time. 3,000 warships, the combined might of the elder races, emerged from faster-than-light travel near the Sol system. "This ends now." Ambassador Gray's message boomed across all channels. "Surrender your control of trade routes and dissolve the Terra Accord, or face the consequences." In his command center, General Mark watched the massive fleet approach. His officers waited tensely for orders, but he seemed almost relaxed. "Sir," one of them finally asked, "should we raise shields? Launch our fleet?" Mark smiled slightly. No need. Just watch. The Council fleet pressed forward, weapons charged. They crossed the orbit of Neptune. Then Uranus. Then Saturn. Their sensors showed no resistance, no defensive measures. See, Gray told his commanders. They were bluffing. All their supposed power, and they don't even try to stop us. The fleet crossed Jupiter's orbit. Mars was next. Victory seemed certain. Then every ship in the Council fleet just stopped. Not through any visible weapon or force. They simply couldn't move forward. Their engines roared at full power, but they remained frozen in space. Having trouble. Mark's voice came through their communications. We did warn you about unauthorized entry into human space. Gray's voice shook with rage. What are you doing to our ships? Nothing harmful, just holding them in place. You see, what you call space isn't quite what you think it is. We figured that out a long time ago. Around the Council fleet, space itself seemed to ripple. Their most advanced sensors couldn't explain what they were seeing. It was as if the humans had turned the fabric of reality into a barrier. Impossible, one of Gray's scientists exclaimed. No species can control space itself. Actually, Mark replied, lots of species can. The cloud dwellers knew about it centuries ago. The deep space nomads use it for navigation. You just never bothered to ask them. The Council fleet tried everything. Energy weapons dissipated harmlessly. Missiles curved away from their targets. Even their most powerful weapons had no effect. You can't just hold us here forever. Gray shouted. We don't need to, Mark answered. Look behind you. The Council commanders turned their sensors around. Their jaws dropped. While they had been focused on Earth, hundreds of human ships had appeared behind them, cutting off their retreat. But it was what else their sensors showed that truly terrified them. Their secret fallback bases, the ones no one was supposed to know about, were being systematically shut down by human forces, not destroyed, just switched off. We've known about your backup plans for years, Mark explained. We could have taken them out any time, but we wanted to give you a chance to change on your own. In the Council fleet, panic began to spread. Some ships tried to fire their weapons anyway. Their systems shut down the moment they attempted to shoot. That's quite enough of that, Mark said. Now you have two choices. Return to Council space peacefully, or stay here while we complete our reorganization of galactic society. Either way, the old system is done. Gray slumped in his command chair. How? He whispered. How did we not see this coming? Because you chose not to, Mark replied. You were so convinced of your superiority that you never imagined we might have grown beyond you. One by one, the Council ships turned around. Their mighty fleet, which had arrived with such confidence, retreated in silence. As they fled, they received reports from across the galaxy. More species were declaring independence from Council control. Trade routes were being redirected through Terra Accord space. The economic empire of the elder races was collapsing. In his command center, Mark watched them go. An aide approached with a report. Sir, should we tell them about our other capabilities? The ones we haven't shown yet. Mark shook his head. No need to frighten them more. They've learned the important lesson. Humanity's patience wasn't weakness. It was preparation. The Council fleet disappeared into faster-than-light travel, leaving human space as quickly as they had come. They had arrived as conquerors and left knowing a terrible truth. Their time of power was over. And they hadn't needed to fire a single shot to lose it all. 6 months after the Council fleet's failed attack, the galaxy had changed beyond recognition. In a new meeting facility, built in neutral space, representatives from all species gathered to formalize the new order. The chamber was circular, with no raised platforms or special seats. Elder races sat beside younger species as equals for the first time in galactic history. Ambassador Gray, now just one voice among many, watched as Jack took the speaking position. The old council is dissolved, Jack announced. In its place, we established the Galactic Assembly, where every species has one vote, regardless of their age, technology, or economic power. The gathered representatives, nearly 300 species, approved the measure unanimously. Even the elder races voted in favor, having finally accepted their new reality. Humanity will share its advances, Jack continued, but not through the old system of control and favors. All technology will be available to all species who can responsibly use it. A member of the Mirror Collective rose to speak. And who decides what responsibly means? You do, Jack replied. Each species will be evaluated by their peers, not just the eldest or most powerful. The days of a few races controlling everyone else are over. The changes were already visible. Ships from dozens of species moved freely through formerly restricted spaces. Trade flourished without the Council's heavy taxation. Species that had been labeled as primitive were sharing knowledge that the elder races had never imagined. In a private room after the main session, Gray approached Jack. "I have to know," he said. "You could have done this at any time in the past 50 years. Why wait?" Jack smiled. "Because we needed to be sure we were right. Humans have a long history of power corrupting. We wanted to prove, to ourselves more than anyone, that we could handle power better than those who came before us. And now we make sure nobody, including humans, ever holds that kind of power again." The new Galactic Assembly moved quickly. Trade barriers fell. Knowledge flowed freely. Species that had been enemies found common ground in shared commerce and exploration. Humanity's role surprised many. Instead of dominating the new system, they focused on maintaining balance. Their advanced technology was used to prevent conflict, not enforce control. In the shipyards around Mars, the massive human fleet was being repurposed. Warships were converted to exploration vessels and trade escorts. Defense platforms became navigation beacons. "The funny thing," Mark told his officers during the conversion, "is that we're actually safer now than when we had the galaxy's strongest military. Turns out real security comes from cooperation, not force." The elder races adapted, some more gracefully than others. They discovered that sharing power didn't mean losing it. It meant having reliable allies instead of fearful subjects. A year after the change, the first Galactic Assembly Summit concluded with a ceremony that would have been impossible under the old system. Species from across the galaxy shared their unique knowledge freely. The Cloud Dwellers revealed space current maps that made travel faster and safer. The Crystal Miners taught efficient resource extraction that didn't harm worlds. The Deep Space Nomads shared navigation techniques that revolutionized exploration. And humanity, they showed everyone how to work together. As the summit ended, a young diplomat from a former council race approached Jack. "I understand now," she said. "You didn't just change who had power. You changed what power means." Jack nodded. "The old council thought power meant control. We showed them that real power comes from working together." Across the galaxy, the results were clear. Trade volume had doubled. Scientific advances were happening faster than ever. Ancient conflicts were being resolved through cooperation instead of force. In his retirement ceremony, Ambassador Gray made one final speech. "We thought we were teaching humanity how to join galactic society," he said. "Instead, they taught us what galactic society could become." The new era wasn't perfect. There were still disputes to resolve, problems to solve. But for the first time in galactic history, all species faced these challenges together. Humanity had abandoned diplomacy, only to create something better: true cooperation.